Hi guys, welcome back to the podcast and thanks for joining us again. This time we have quite a hot topic that I get asked about a lot from both sellers and buyers, which is home inspection and where that fits into the property transaction. And for that, we have brought in Eric Bell, who is CEO of Inspector Home Group Southern Africa. Thanks for coming through, Eric. If you could introduce yourself and Inspector Home.
Yeah, fantastic. Willem, thank you very much for the invite. It's good to be here, and it's also good to put across what we do and how we can help the many people out there that are buying homes or even selling homes. Inspector Home has been operating since 1984, so we've been around about 35, 36 years. During that time, it's grown into a multi-purpose type operation where we do inspections of existing homes. We call those pre-purchase inspections. We also do inspections for the industrial and commercial sector of the market as well. Essentially, buying a home can be a serious issue if you buy a house that has got defects. And we always say that a lot of homes do have defects. In fact, the majority of homes have defects. Fortunately, not all of them serious, but you don't want to be one of the 10% of homes that have got serious defects. You don't want to buy one of those houses. You don't want to end up having buyer's remorse. You don't want to end up having to sue the seller and go against the estate agent and messy litigation. Essentially, when people buy houses, they buy houses for the purpose of upliftment. They want to have a better home. They pool their resources, and normally they commit themselves to the maximum they can afford at the time. So there's no spare money for the inevitable problems that can come out of buying a property. So we find that having a home inspected is the best thing that anybody can do, because a home inspection costs for an average, say, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom house, about 3,000 to 4,500 rand, which is a small price to pay for the peace of mind. We basically, when we inspect a house, we check the house out very thoroughly externally. We get on the roof, we get into the roof cavity, we check out the geyser, we check out the roof trusses. The roof is tied down properly. People don't realize that half the time the cornices crack and you get dust coming in from the roof is because the roof is not tied to the building properly. And we check the inside for all sorts of issues like damp and structural cracks and whatever, obviously the outside as well. We also check out all the outbuildings, the garage, swimming pool, tennis courts, whatever's in the property within the confines of the boundary of the property, we check it. And it's amazing what we will find, because when people buy properties, they're looking at the aesthetics, they're looking at how nice it is. They don't see a lot of the defects. They don't look at the roof and say, well, the roof looks a bit shoddy, unless it's really bad. They're looking at the nice things, the nice kitchen, the bathrooms, the lounge, the entertainment area. Those are the sort of things that they're looking at. So and a lot of times, the people that sell houses are, in actual fact, I say the word unscrupulous, but they are unscrupulous, because they will sell houses knowing that there are defects. And of course, with the current way that the market is, houses are sold using disclosure documents. I think the footsteps clause is on its way out, but the disclosure documents, especially this new property practitioners bill, they're using disclosure documents. Now, a disclosure document, if it's filled in by the seller won't know the condition of the property, and neither will the agent. I mean, agents are not trained to get onto roofs and into roofs and that sort of thing. It's not what they do. And so there's a false sense of security with a lot of properties that are sold, because they think that just because it's got a fresh coat of paint on and it looks good and all the cracks have been filled, that the house is going to be good. And of course, a few months down the line, or 6 months or a year after they've bought, they found that there's roofing issues, that there's cracks, there's damp problems and whatever. One of the biggest hassles that we have, that people don't realize, and especially in the Gauteng region, is the soil conditions in Gauteng are not the best soil conditions in the world. They tend to be very clay type soil, a lot of rocks and stones, and sort of that orange colored earth, etc. So you get a lot of settlement problems and whatever. Not only that, but Gauteng houses are built mainly with their gutter systems where they discharge the water onto the ground. Discharging water onto the ground allows the water to go underneath the foundations. This causes the water to go underneath the foundation concrete, washes away the fines, and causes settlement. The houses crack. And a lot of people don't realize that this is a huge issue, and it can be easily circumvented. And we explain that in our reports, because if a house has got cracks, and we know it's from moisture content in the ground, we will then say how it can be rectified, which we can explain later in this interview if you want. But that's sort of essentially what we do. So, you know, the whole idea of having a home inspection is to give peace of mind. And anybody that wants to go and spend, doesn't matter whether it's 600,000 rand house or a 6 million rand house or a 60 million rand house, the same thing applies. You're buying somebody else's property, and in a lot of cases, full disclosure is not made. So it's your insurance policy, the inspection is your insurance policy that you bought wisely.
Yeah, no, and I mean, that definitely makes sense. I think, so just to outline what we'll go through. So we've covered sort of the background and function of Inspector Home. I'll put timestamps for our viewers just so you can see where certain sections are if you need to skip ahead to a specific topic. But what Eric and I will cover now will be, you know, what does an inspection cover? What does it not cover? Are there different levels to an inspection, and what's recommended for buyers and sellers? And what issues and terms and conditions should buyers be aware of, you know, when looking at buying a home, and what should they specifically look at having inspected? That's pretty much the gist of the topics that we'll be covering. So yeah, we can go straight into it and ask Eric, what does the inspection actually cover?
As an inspector, we prefer to do full house inspections. In other words, we check everything. The reason for that is that if you're only checking, I mean, some inspection companies will say, oh, well, we'll do a basic inspection. Well, what does a basic inspection cover? Basic inspection might cover some of the things, but doesn't include all the things. So the only way, and we've never ever had a comeback on any reports in the 35 years we've been operating where people have said, well, we didn't check this or didn't check that, is to actually do it properly. So we do a full inspection. And that basically covers from the apex of the roof, which is the top of the roof. We check the ridge cappings, we check the tiles, we check the valleys, we check the underlay on the roof, because different houses with different roof tiles. It could be concrete roof tiles, clay roof tiles, it can be slate, it can be chromatic roof sheeting, all the different mediums. We always check to make sure that the roof is in good condition, especially the valleys and areas where water can get in. In a lot of cases, we find that roofs are badly installed initially. And so there's inherent problems with the roof because proper care and attention wasn't made during the construction process. And sometimes you find where the valley is actually, the tiles are actually almost touching, and you'll find that leaves and twigs and rubbish actually collect in that little gap on the valley, and then it forms what we call a bird's nest under the tiles. So now when you have a heavy downpour, the water comes rushing down, and it now hits that bird's nest, and now the water that's deflected and sprays underneath the tiles, sprays back over onto the underlay, and then it gets through, and that's when you see lots of roof leaks, and that damages the ceiling. It also damages the roof timbers. Sometimes we find valleys where the roof timbers are totally rotten because it's been going on for years and nobody's bothered to fix it. So these are all sort of basic things. The trouble is, of course, that a roof is an expensive thing to replace or to repair in a lot of cases. So if you've got timber that needs to be replaced, you've got to cut open the roof, you've got to take the offending timbers out, put new in, etc. So you don't want to go that route. That's why it's good to have it checked out. Then, of course, we go down to the gutters and the downpipes. Now, the gutters normally are hung badly because it sounds very cynical, but it's the truth, because gutters have to have a floor. And often you find, especially if the roof has got gutters going all the way around, we call that a hip roof, where the gutters continues all the way around. Invariably, it's not enough downpipes because people don't like to see downpipes. Downpipes allow the water to discharge off the roof from the gutter very quickly. If you've got insufficient downpipes, then the downpipes are quite small because they like them aesthetically to be small, so they don't look bulky. It doesn't handle the volume of water, so then the water overflows and that causes damage to the foundations again. So the problem that we find is that a lot of gutters are not hung properly and water doesn't flow down the downpipes. Often those downpipes, especially if there's leaves on the roof, which are from the trees and the trees around the house, etc., those leaves block the downpipes. Now the water can't flow properly, so as what happens, the gutter fills up with water, and then you have like a waterfall all the way around the house where the water's overflowing. That causes serious damage to the foundations. People don't realize that. Then we check the superstructure, the superstructure is the main walls of the house, the outside walls of the house. That's the superstructure. That includes the windows, the doors, door frames, etc. So we check all that, and we make sure that the superstructure is in good condition. And often we find lots of hairline cracks. A small little hairline crack in a wall will absorb lots of moisture, and that water will transfer to the inner walls if it's left for too long. So we check for all those sort of things. And we check the condition of the windows, whether they're timber, steel, aluminium frames, or whatever, if they're installed properly, if they're good and bad, and the doors, the same thing. Replacing doors in a house, especially sliding doors, can cost thousands and thousands of rand. A sliding door today installed, say a 4.5 meter, 5 meter sliding door will cost you the region of about 10,000 rand, 15,000 rand. Because glazing it today is about 4.5 grand. And the timber itself, plus you've got to chop it out, put a new one in, etc. So all those sort of things. And often you find the people who actually haven't had the money to replace those, so they either don't open them in the show house, or they say that they're working fine, and when you move in, you find that you can't open the doors. Now you've got to replace them. So then it becomes a litigious thing. So these are all the things that we check. And as I say, the big thing is where the downpipes come down into the ground. In certain cases, like up in Joburg, where you have what we call splash channels, those are like those little concrete off-round splash channels. That water is designed to channel that's designed to channel the water away from the house. Now, that's fine, but if your site's got a slope on it, the side where the water's got to go uphill, it's got to go uphill to go around the house. So that's where the water can actually backflow against the house and then get underneath the foundations. And we can show you lots of pictures of houses that have cracked badly because of that. And so that gives you the sort of an idea as to what we find in the house. So of course, there's the things like the plumbing and the electrical supply into the house, plumbing as well. A lot of houses don't have like a mains water cutoff on them. For some reason, they were never installed. So if you have a geyser that's leaking, or you have a flood in your house, you can't shut off. You've got to go to find the mains water supply, which is normally outside the property by your front gate or in that area, and now try and shut off the water supply. In the meantime, your house is flooding out. All those sort of things we check, and we make sure that you are advised as to the condition. And if it's not there, we'll say it's not there. And it's easy enough to fix it, but you don't want to buy a house and find these things and not having been checked. So we're very thorough, and then we go inside the house and we check the inside of the house. I mean, a simple thing is like, for example, in bathrooms, how many times have you had a house where you see that the internal walls have got damp on them? And that's normally caused by the shower, because a lot of the showers are actually installed on internal walls. So if I tell you that if you go and you check your own shower in your own house, and all your listeners can look at the same thing, and you actually look at the two stopcocks, unless you've got a single mixer, or a single mixer, same thing applies. Mm-hmm. But if you just remove the chrome bezels on the shower stopcocks, or on the actual mixer, and just to pull the screws out, or just slide the bezel forward and look underneath there, 99% of the time there's no grouting underneath there. So every time you shower, water runs down the wall, goes into that gap behind the tiles, and now builds up water and damp in the wall. Now that if you've got a double-story house, for example, that actually results in a leak in the ceiling below. So if you're in the lounge and you've got a bathroom above, then all of a sudden you see stains on the ceiling. The first thing that you do is you call in your plumber, and the plumber says, "Oh no, you've got a problem with your waste. We've got to rip out your waste." Now the waste is embedded in mosaic and concrete and whatever, and you've got to chop that out. It can cost you anything between 5,000 and 10,000 rand to rip out the shower waste and put in the new shower waste. That wasn't the problem. The problem was a meter up the wall where your shower stopcocks are situated, the 1.2 meters up the wall where your shower stopcocks are. A simple little thing where all it needs is to move the bezels forward, and to grout around those bezels will save you a huge amount of money and stop the leak. And then you won't have the damp in the wall. Then you can repair the damp wall. But people don't realize that, and plumbers don't check. And for obvious reasons, they make a lot of money out of replacing shower waste. So little things like that, having done this for 35, 36 years now, there's so many things that we've learned, and we try to impart in our inspectors to actually help home buyers to make sure that they actually buy wisely and that they're informed of all the things that are wrong. So that sort of gives you a basic sort of thing of what we look for. And also like garage floors. A lot of times, you buy a house, especially if you're a fix-it sort of guy and you want to be able to work on your motor car. Probably 80% of garage floors have got an inherent problem, because the way that they have been, the concrete's been done and the screed's been done, the screed actually breaks up. So if you jack your car up to take a wheel off, for example, and so it makes a hole in the garage floor. That's because the screed is done incorrectly. And what should happen with a screed is that the screed, in actual fact, is supposed to be done with a mix of river sand and cement. And the idea is that when you're screeding, that you actually use a wooden float to actually get it level, and then use a steel float, and then you wet the screed to get the cement to rise, so that you get that sort of creamy sort of green sort of slurry on the top, which actually forms your grano finish, your hard cement finish. Now that's the correct way to do it, because you're causing the cement to rise. But what they do today is they just do it sort of a semi-dry mix. Then they mix cement up in a cotton and they pour it over the top, and it looks the same because you've actually got a cement finish on the top. But underneath it's dry and it's granular, and it's not kicked up because there's not enough water in it. So what happens is you've got this hard crust. The minute you drop anything onto the spanner or whatever, or try to jack up a car, you end up with a hole in the floor. And if you're an estate agent and you've inspected or been to see many houses, you'll find a lot of garage floors have got holes in the garage floor. And that's the reason, because nobody understands the difference. That's called a Portuguese screed, which is the incorrect way of doing it, because you're pouring cement on the top. Whereas a grano screed is where you actually wet it to get the cement to rise to the top, so that the whole surface is totally immersed in water. Little things like that are so important to an inspector, because he knows how it should be, and how it can be fixed. And those are the sort of things that we put in a report. And the other thing too, I must re-emphasize, is that we don't condemn houses. The whole object of our exercise when we do a report is to tell it factually like it is. 99% of the time, people still buy the house that they have inspected. Contrary to what some estate agents think, they tend to be scared of the fact that we will find things wrong and the people won't buy the house. And people are actually spending the sort of money it costs to have an inspection on $3 or $4 grand. They've already decided they want the house. All they want is they want to know what they're buying and what is wrong with the house. And unless it's got serious defects, which is very seldom that it's bad enough to actually walk away from the house, they will buy the house. And they can also negotiate with the report. So, well, I've got to fix this, and this, and the seller will say, okay, well, I'll reduce the price by 50 grand or whatever it is to accommodate the work, and they meet halfway invariably, and so that's the way it is. So it's just a good thing, So.
Okay, great. That's perfect, and I think a lot of useful information there that a lot of people probably take for granted, which is why it's important to actually have that inspection done. Because even for me sitting here as an estate agent, there's stuff that I didn't even think about. So it's definitely important that people seek that help out and make sure they have all their bases covered. That being said, though, Eric, what is not covered in an inspection?
Okay. All right. So the basics of the thing is to actually show you what can be seen with the naked eye. And so we can't start digging up the foundations or peeling back a fitted carpet, stuff like that. So what we will say in our reports is that we would give a report based on what can be seen. We also know the things to look for example, things like damp that's been covered up with paint and that sort of thing. And invariably, we can normally find it, but we would be very careful. I mean, for example, because we have dry seasons, unlike other countries where you have rainy seasons throughout the year, like in Europe and Canada and America and that. In this country, we go for 3 or 4 or 5 months. So sometimes we can inspect a house that's had damp issues and it's been repainted and it looks fine. So what we do is we're very careful. We take photographs of areas where we suspect, like balconies, overhang balconies, they invariably leak. So we know all the things to look for. So we'll take photographs. So what happens is that if somebody buys a property and then 6 months later there's water running down the walls, we have got all the circumstantial evidence to say, well, when we inspected the house, this was not evident because it was all repainted and whatever. And then we can prove that in actual fact that was fraudulent, that the house actually had defects. Because once you actually start uncovering things and you start finding this was an inherent problem, that it was a design issue, 9 times out of 10 we'll find it, but in the odd occasion that we might not. For example, the other thing that you can't see is you can't see what's happened with the foundations because they're underground. So we can only look at the walls. Now, if you look at a house, you can invariably see, if you're trained, like my guys are trained, we can normally point out where there are alterations to the house. It's to the layperson who won't see it, but to us, we'll be able to see it quite easily. Invariably, when they extend a house, right, being, for example, they stick on some extra bedrooms or stick on a new lounge or a TV room or whatever the situation is, the house, they add on and they go further out, and they go out 3 or 4 or 6 or 8 meters or whatever. Now, building contractors, and they should know that if you're going to extend an existing house that's been sitting there for 40, 50, 60 years, the ground conditions, you're going to disturb the ground conditions, you're going to now dig and put in another part and add that on without having an expansion joint or whatever and join into the existing house. 9 times out of 10 it fails because the house, the new section, the foundations haven't been designed properly and they haven't been installed the way they should have been. And I'll explain to you why. So if you take the existing foundations and you copy the foundations and you think, well, that ground is the same ground as the rest of the house is on, but it doesn't work like that because essentially that ground has been compacted by nature for the last, I don't know how many 100,000 years. You build a house on it, you dig your foundations, you put the house in, it's now settled for the last 50, 60 years. Now you come along and you stick on an extension. That extension is going to crack. So how do you stop it? Well, you stop it by, in actual fact, when you dig the foundations, instead of actually just digging the foundations normally, on the end of the foundations and during the length of the foundations, you put in extra pads. We call them concrete pads. Those pads transfer the weight. So in other words, if you've got a foundation 600 by 250 deep and 600 wide, you would come out 1.6 meters by a meter and put in a concrete pad every sort of 1.5 meters along. And then when you get to the end where the building stops, on each corner of the foundation and in the center, you would put in a 2 meter square pad coming out about a meter. The reason for that is you're pushing the footprint of the new building out, and you're actually allowing the weight of the building transferred onto a bigger surface area, which is underground. I mean, you're filling over it with soil, but you're creating a footprint which is much bigger and will stop any movement. So if you do it that way, it costs almost nothing to do because you're just a little bit of extra concrete, but it makes such a huge difference to the overall extension, because now you know that you can join that extension on to tie it into the existing brickwork, and you're relatively safely assured that they're not going to have any further movement or settlement. Those are the sort of things that make builders, builders in actual fact don't do it, but those are the sort of things that we will point out. And if we see that there are problems where the building in actual fact is moving, we can actually recommend that those pads be put in after the fact. So you've got to repair the cracks, obviously, but the thing is, it's not all doom and gloom, because we can say, look, that's what's happened. The builder didn't do the job properly, but this is an easy fix. We just have to dig underneath and underpin that foundation. So even the worst houses that you see, the worst cracks that you see, are invariably caused by water problems. 90% of cracks in houses are caused by water problems, water going underneath. Not caused because the ground is moving, because it's water that causes the hassles. Retaining walls don't fall over because the soils push them over. They fall over because the water behind the retaining wall pushes it over. So, and also the other thing too, people don't realize when they're buying a property, if you're buying a property in, just say, in a gated estate, and you're buying one of the last ones at the bottom of the hill, all the nice ones at the top of the hill have got beautiful views, and you come along and you buy a property at the bottom of the hill. Not such a good thing, for the simple reason that the water from the houses and comes off all the roofs of the 40, 50 or 600 houses that have been built above it. All that water discharges onto the driveways normally, because they try to put the water onto the driveways around the house or whatever, and they discharge it down the hill. But that water eventually finds its way underground, and now you find that the houses at the bottom suffer with what's called a high water table, and then you find that water comes up through the floors. Now that's a huge problem to fix, because now you've bought a house that's actually not livable, because every time you have some sort of cyclonic weather conditions where you get a couple of weeks of heavy rain, intermittent rain or whatever, all of a sudden the water table comes up where the water in actual fact is flowing up, coming up through your lounge floor or your bedroom floor, etc. And we try to sell a house that's got that problem. and you have huge problems. And it's very costly to fix because you've now got to dig like a moat around the whole house and put in agriculture drains and try to drain the water away from the house so that you don't have the water coming up through it. Those are the sort of things that people that don't have houses inspected will actually end up having problems like that sort of thing. And then you've got a problem because now you've got a bond and you can't sell the house.
Yeah.
And then you've got a service to bond. So you don't want to have those sort of hassles. So this is just, and I keep saying to estate agents, this is such an important thing because you guys have got a job to do and you do your job well. But if you just realize that to have an inspection done circumvents you from any backlash that you might have. And also it gives your company a good name because you are now actually saying, well, we want to have the house inspected. If I could just explain that in America, you have realtors that sell properties.
Yeah.
And you have a buyer's realtor and you have a seller's realtor. So there's no conflict of interest. And the buyer's realtor, because of the complexities of American houses, because of the fact that you have internal heating and this sort of thing, the normal realtors, and I've got lots of friends that are realtors in Canada and America, they all say we wouldn't think of selling a house without having it inspected for the simple reason they don't want to have egg on their face and they have integrity. Often sellers don't want to have their houses inspected for obvious reasons because they know that things wrong. But the agent needs to basically sort of say, well, we'd like to sell the house with it being inspected because we know that we will be able to sell it with integrity and that we can put our brand name on it, etc. And we know that we're not going to have any problems. Otherwise, you sell it and you hope to goodness that nothing's going to happen. And that's not a good thing to do.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's again, peace of mind for the agent and also the seller, because with this new property practitioners bill, the seller and the agent can be held responsible should there be shown that the disclosure document, the disclosure document now becomes part of the sales agreement, as you know. Yeah. So you can't just say, well, I didn't know. And I mean, the old disclosure document said this is a true and honest evaluation of the property as I know it. But that's all very well and good. But the people that are actually filling it in, like the seller or the estate agent, won't know the true condition. So those disclosure documents should be filled in by a competent person, i.e. a building inspector, a registered building inspector. So to me, it makes a lot of sense. And this industry is now being regulated by this property practitioner as well. I think that it's a good thing, and that we'll see that more and more people are actually taking the opportunity of actually having their properties inspected. Doesn't make sense. I mean, it's like you've got to know that if you're buying a house, it's going to have problems. Better to know the problems beforehand. Don't pretend they don't exist.
Yeah, true. Okay. Yeah, excellent. So yeah, I think that takes us straight into the next point, which is in terms of the inspection itself. Are there different levels? I know we touched on it earlier. Are there different levels, like a basic, more in depth, or anything like that? And what should buyers and sellers opt for? Okay.
Look, the difference between the price of doing a cheap sort of basic inspection and having it done is not a lot of money. It's probably, I don't know, maybe 1,000 rand. But the danger is that you get a 50-point checklist from a cheaper inspection, or you get a full house inspection, and you can also have like we do a full house inspection with a cost of rectification. Now we do that because some people, especially buyers, want to be able to know what they're in for if they buy the house and they've got to fix things. But the cost of rectification can also be a bit of a nebulous thing, because we would say, well, to get a registered subcontractor to come in and put a new underlay on a roof would cost approximately 200 rand a square meter, and it's a 200 square meter house. So that would be 40 grand sort of attitude. The seller would turn around and say, yeah, well, that's ridiculous because I can get it done. I can buy the plastic, my garden boy can do it. Well, he can't. But I mean, that's the sort of the rationale that we find that we're faced with sometimes. So we don't include the cost of rectification with a standard report for the simple reason that it can tend to rub up people the wrong way. But for a buyer that wants to actually know what they're in for, I think it's a good thing to do. Essentially, our inspections are so detailed that we go for everything. In other words, we check anything and everything. However, the cosmetic aspects, like things like, for example, paint and stuff like that, I mean, we'll make comment on it, but it's those are sort of things that you can see for yourself. But for example, built-in cupboards. Now, when you look at a house, I mean, how many times have you had a house that you've now repainted? I mean, if I ask you the question yourself, have you ever had your built-in cupboards painted inside the cupboard when you paint the outside?
No.
The answer to that is no.
Yeah.
So the thing is, when we inspect a house, we often find that the house is all nicely painted inside. So we ask permission, and we ask if they mind if we look inside the cupboards, and you'll find a whole heap of problems in cupboards, especially the top cupboards, because you'll see that the ceiling has got lots of damp, mold on it and whatever inside the cupboards, because nobody's ever bothered to open those cupboards before, and they also don't want to move their clothing and move all their stuff out of the cupboard when the painters come. So they paint the outside, but they forget to paint the inside. The same thing applies in kitchens. I mean, if I tell you that probably 70% of houses that under the kitchen sink where you do your washing up and whatever, that washing area where the double sink is, that normally the sink cupboard is smelly. It's got damp in it because the water has got behind the tiles or behind the splashback. Water's got in through the doors because of vigorous washing and splashing, whatever. And so to replace a kitchen unit underneath the sink will probably cost you 15 grand today, 20 grand by the time you finish, because you've got to replace the tops and everything else. So this is all sort of things. So we look inside the cupboards, and we can also see, for example, the condition of the roof. If we're looking inside a bedroom cupboard, we can see that the roof in actual fact is not in good condition because the ceilings are actually in poor condition and that the ceiling boards are very badly stained. But they look good on the outside because they're painted and they've been fixed up. But so that gives us the cause when we actually getting into the roof cavity to check the roof up very, very thoroughly, which we do anyway. But also we find all sorts of things in the roof. You know, we'll find bad damp issues, and we'll find wood borer and insect infestation. They're all things to be avoided. And the other thing too, which is a very important thing, I mean, when you have you move into a house and you phone up your insurance company, the insurance company says, that they're prepared to insure you and they whatever. Now you find that you don't have a geyser tray, because a lot of houses, especially in the Gauteng region, don't have geyser trays, especially houses 20, 30 years old. They didn't put geyser trays in. They used to shortcut. Some houses don't even have valley irons in because they didn't put them in because it's cheap to do it without. So you find that when you've got an insurance company that you've moved into the house, and then all of a sudden you have a geyser burst, and now it costs 30, 40 grand because the cupboards and the kitchen are wrecked, or the bedroom cupboards are wrecked, your floors, you've got laminated flooring, or the carpets get wrecked and whatever. The insurance company are not going to they might pay the first time around, they're not going to pay the second or the third time around, because they're now going to say, well, you need to have that fixed and whatever. Now you've got to take the geyser out, you've got to put a geyser tray in, or probably put a new geyser in because the geyser's old. And we check the condition of the geysers. I mean, geysers normally have a lifespan of about 5, 6 years, 7 years. Sometimes they last longer, but not often. Because they're designed like everything else in this modern world we live in today, planned obsolescence. They don't make them so strong like, 50 years ago they made a geyser that would last 50 years. Today, geysers, even the quick hot geysers, etc. You'll be lucky, and even my own house, I've got quick hot geysers, and every 4 or 5 or 6 years, I have to replace it. I find it starts leaking, it gets into the tray, I see water running outside. But often you find that the trays are not properly installed, and the tray's got the negative flow, so the tray fills up with water, overflows into the ceiling, and then you get water dripping down on you. So yeah. And importantly, there's so many things that we find structurally in roofs where people don't realize that they've all this weight sitting up in the roof, like the geyser, and they've got downlighters being cut into the ceilings, and they've actually damaged underneath of the tie beams, because when they cut in, because in the old days, those ceilings were just ordinary ceilings and ordinary light fittings, central light fittings, like a ordinary sort of ripcord type light fitting. But today, when you start cutting holes in ceilings and you start putting in downlighters, you actually sometimes you damage the underside of the tie beams. That can cause a weakening of the roof structure. And I've seen roofs collapse because of that. So there's lots of things. That's why it's so important to do what we do.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think we've gone quite in depth and covered a lot of it. Naturally, when you approach sellers or buyers about this kind of topic, a lot of the time there might be some hesitation. Maybe it's cost-based or whatever the case may be. But for a buyer, for instance, what sort of things should they be aware of, and what should they look out for that might help them make that decision upon just looking at the property themselves, that might help them make the decision to be like, okay, we actually do need to have an inspector come in here?
I think that, that the first thing that you do is, I don't believe that buyers should actually try and do it themselves, but I think that to get a nice warm feeling, I mean, if you work on the premise that every house will have defects, a lot of people seem to think, especially men, seem to think because they're macho guys and whatever, they can do this type of thing themselves. Okay, I don't need an inspector. I've lived in a house all my life and whatever. But a lot of people, especially professional people, lawyers, doctors, and whatever, they've got no clue. And even if you've been in the construction industry, civil engineering or whatever, you won't pick up the things that we pick up. You won't know what to look for, because it's like, this is our specialty. This is what we do. Yeah. And it's the small things that can cost the most amount of money. So what we're saying is that, it's not a good thing to try and diagnose. If you're looking at a house and you like the house and you decide that this is really the house that you want to buy, then be open and honest with yourself and say, you know what, even if I do know how to do it, I'd rather call in a professional to come and check it out. Why must I take it on my shoulders? Because I'm going to have egg on my face if I choose a bad house. So call in a professional inspector to come and do the inspection, and so that you can have peace of mind. If the professional inspector doesn't do his job properly, God forbid that it happens, he should carry, like we do, we carry professional indemnity insurance. So if there is a problem and then the thing is wrong, then the company that you choose should be big enough to actually employ the services of or have professional indemnity insurance. So I would say that, you can look at a roof and see that the roof's got some dents in it, or it's got some, but a lot of roofs in actual fact were installed badly right from day one. So they actually weren't straight. When I drive around, because I'm in the business, I look at roofs when I'm driving on the freeway, and I can see probably 5 out of 10 roofs that are problematic because they've sagged, or they've got big dents in them, or whatever, or they've had alterations done and they didn't take the tiles and take the battens off where they've extended out, and various other things. So you can see humps in the roof and dents in the roof, or hollows in the roof. And also, things like, for example, if you've got a house that's got a tree hanging over it, trees do a huge amount of damage, because what you don't realize is that because a tree deposits leaves and branches and debris onto the roof, that debris attracts moisture. So you have a whole lot of stuff lying on the roof tiles, and you think, oh, it's not a problem because it just washes off. Well, it doesn't. What it does is it washes into the gutters, it blocks the gutters, it blocks the valleys and whatever. But not only that, but because the roof is, and sometimes like the roof is in shade because of the tree, late in the afternoon, the tree is creating shade, and so the roof stays wet for probably 50% of its lifespan, because there's so much debris sitting there. Because you should clean a roof off once a week, or at least twice a month, and clean your gutters out at least that amount of times, because you want to get rid of the water. Water doesn't do anybody any good. And so if you've got water sitting on the roof, what happens is that the moisture in the tiles, actually, even on a concrete roof tile or a clay roof tile, that water actually finds its way through the tiles. It absorbs into the tile and it condenses on the inside. That water transfers onto the battens, and then your battens and your underlay and your roof trusses get wet. And when they get wet, they start to rot. And that's affected life. So, we often find that, especially roofs that have got trees and overhang debris and stuff like that over the top of the roof, you'll find that the roofs are not in good condition. So, but that's just one of the many things. I mean, it's a whole lot, but I mean, also see cracks in a house, call in a building inspector, because, and it's, you can call in an engineer, but an engineer, well, he'll tell you about the cracks maybe, but they don't always identify this for the same cause we do. They might say, oh, it needs to be underpinned or whatever. In a lot of cases, underpinning is an expensive option. We can actually recommend how to do it without calling in structural engineers, because a lot of these issues, like cracks in walls caused by sagging foundations, are very basic building repair stuff, which is easy enough. You can even do it yourself if you're told how to do it. So our reports would include how to do it, how to fix these things. So that's a good thing about having a report.
Okay. Yeah, thanks so much, Eric. I think that was very informative. I know it was for me, so I'm sure it will be for our listeners as well. And yeah, I think one big takeaway is peace of mind. So definitely something I'll be recommending to clients, both buyers and sellers, is
Excellent.
inspect a home to come through and have a look at their properties. And even personally, I think you shed light on a lot of things that don't even cross anyone's mind, yet to you it's natural. You know it in depth, and I think that's the value of having an outside party take a look at that, because they're experts and they've got no personal affiliation with any property, so can give an impartial report.
Sure.
And I think that's very useful for everyone involved in the transaction. So I'd like to thank you for
Thank you.
joining the podcast and imparting all that information on us. If you'd like to close off with any information particular to inspect a home and how people can reach you and where your
Yes.
offices are.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you. Yes. Okay, well, Inspect Home is a national operation. We've got franchise. It's a franchise operation. We've got inspectors all over the country: Cape Town, Joburg, Durban, etc., PE, the Garden Route. So we can perform even Bloemfontein. So we've got inspectors out there waiting to give our service. Essentially, we have a call center. Our Inspector Home call center is a very simple one. It's 0861 400 400. That's 0861 400 400. The call center is 24/7, and we will respond. Obviously, at night we might respond a little bit, sort of at 8 o'clock in the morning, the following morning. But essentially, you can leave messages or send email call center at info@inspectorhome.co.za. That's our call center info number. And we will get inspectors. Also, you can go onto our website, www.inspectorhome.co.za, and see about all the things we do. There's a lot of case studies, referrals from clients, and all the things that we do. It's quite an interesting website, I think you'll find. And I think the important thing is, we've been in the business for 36, nearly 37 years now, and we've provided, I think, an exemplary service with the biggest inspection company in South Africa. And we're still going strong, and we're growing. And I thank you for the opportunity of including us this afternoon, and I hope that it has been of benefit, and I hope that we have a long continued association with you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much, Eric. I'll definitely be in touch and relay any questions that our listeners might have. And yeah, I look forward to working with you going forward. Thanks for listening, everyone. And any questions, as usual, drop them in the comments. I'm going to add all the information, all the contact details for Inspector Home so that you can reach them personally as well if you'd like to. And yeah, until next time, thanks a lot, guys.
Willem, thank you.
Thanks.